Welcome to Washington in Focus, your source for the week's top stories in the state of Washington. I'm Cole Lauterbach, managing editor for the Center Square Newswire service. This week, we'll be discussing King County's streamlining of its homelessness response, Washington lawmakers looking to tackle this whole AI thing, gun stores calling it quits ahead of a new state law, and the state's highest court being asked whether the governor's office can negotiate labor contracts behind closed doors. That's ahead on Washington in Focus. I'm Cole Lauterbach.
Some people would call him a loser. He ran for state office. He was beaten. He started a business. He failed. He ran for Congress. He lost. He was nominated for vice president. He lost again. But he knew only those who never tried are the real losers. And Abraham Lincoln was no loser. Persistence. Pass it on. From the Foundation for a Better Life at values.com.
Welcome back to Washington in Focus. I'm Cole Lauterbach. Now, let's jump into the headlines. The King County Regional Homelessness Authority is getting some restructuring done. The agency receives hundreds of millions of dollars from cities, the counties, and federal government and acts as a central command for the region's fight against homelessness. Seattle reporter Spencer Pauly covered the announcement. Spencer, what are the major changes?
Well, the main change you're seeing in this new interlocal agreement is the restructuring of KCRHA's flawed governmental system. Since KCRHA was first formed in 2019, the agency had three boards that basically operated the entire agency. There was the governing committee, the implementation board, and the continuum of care board. Now, they all had different sort of functions, including the Continuum of Care Board specifically working to apply for federal funding to fund some homelessness initiatives throughout the county. The Governing Committee, which was basically run by Seattle officials like Mayor Bruce Harrell or King County Executive Dow Constantine. But there was a lot of issues because you saw a lot of combating opinions and voices and work being done. That was a big issue we saw from a lot of officials throughout the King County area. Now, the new interlocal agreement would instead create a single governing board, and that board would be responsible for providing fiscal oversight, monitoring performance, and establishing policy direction for KCRHA in their work to curb homelessness rates, which are increasingly worsening in Seattle and King County.
Right. And they centered in on the three board issue so much so you had one of the previous interim CEOs that was up for the permanent position say that was the reason why I don't want this job. Correct?
Yep, exactly. Yeah. Glenn Powell resigned saying this was too much chaos, basically. Not his exact words, but just the dysfunction of the entire agency led to so many disputes. And that was an issue that he stated, as well as former CEO Mark Dones, who was the last permanent CEO of KCRHA since it started in 2019, up until Kelly Kinnison took on the role this summer.
Now, the board, KCRHA, it's hard to understate how much money that authority handles to fight homelessness. Give us just an average of by year how much money the state, the county, local governments, and the federal government all send KCRHA in grants.
Yeah, so the counties just are KCRHA's funding in 2024 alone totaled $249.1 million. That's a lot of money. Now, the majority of funding comes from the city of Seattle, who dedicated $104.7 million. There, where, we're seeing a lot of the homelessness issue. And so that's where they're targeting a lot of funds and resources, specifically in the downtown area, where if anyone comes to visit, they will see the homelessness issue and drug crisis that coincides along with it is prominent. Now, King County is the second highest form of funding. They have provided $42.3 million this year alone. So while this interlocal agreement signals a continuing, agreement between the two entities with KCRHA, I wonder if we're going to see more funding as in 2025 as opposed to the $249.1 million this year. Now, there are some other smaller entities that fund this, including a coalition of North King County cities, which pitch in about $250,000 or 0.1% of the KCRHA's budget.
Now you've got, I mean, and this kind of comes also as a reaction not to just to the fact that the CEOs or the directors not wanting the job and saying that, the board was, that was too ungainly with answering to too many boards. But you had cities that were genuinely upset because they were sending hundreds of millions of dollars, Seattle specifically, to KCRHA, and they still had to walk into their chambers through a lot of homeless people, and they're still getting dogged by the reputation that homelessness is out of control. What are the city's reactions to these changes, Spencer?
Well, positive. The three-branch structure the three government committee structure was a big issue I've seen from my coverage of KCRHA over this past year. So seeing it change to a streamlining has been a net positive, I feel, from what I'm hearing from reactions. Another common issue I'm hearing is that there's a lack of representation of other King County cities other than Seattle and King County. I think this was brought up by King County Councilmember Rod Dembowski, who said that was something he prioritized. Now, he said, of course, Seattle and King County spend the most money, but that homelessness is still a regional issue. And if the King County Regional Homelessness Authority wants to work to address regional homeless, they need to have some members on the table who represent more than just Seattle. Now, what this interlocal agreement does is part of this singular branch, the governing committee, there would be three representatives of the smaller cities in King County. Now, there are already three that are part of the governing committee that's already established. Hang with me. This gets a little complex here just because of how difficult it is to understand KCRHA's government structure. But there are three already. It's Auburn Mayor Nancy Backus, Redmond Mayor Angela Burney, and Renton City Council Member Ed Prince. Now, they're already on there, and if anything else changes, I think we will see them represent these other King County cities as part of the new interlocal agreement and this new governing committee.
Wow. Next time we're going to have to buy you a whiteboard for all of this.
There you go. Yeah. I'll have it behind you.
Like election night coverage with the big interactive board behind you. Thank you, Spencer. Good story. We'll be curious to see how this moves forward with this new agreement and whether or not it moves the needle in terms of affecting homelessness in King County. Washington lawmakers are looking into the potential dangers of artificial intelligence, referred to as AI. The technology has moved billions of dollars on trading floors as investors seem to flock to anything that uses it. But where should lines be drawn when it comes to guardrails for public safety? Investigative reporter TJ Martinell covered a meeting of state lawmakers who pondered that question. TJ, from what you wrote this week, the focus seemed to be more on law enforcement.
Yeah, this subcommittee was looking at it from a perspective of public safety and how it's going to impact that as far as the use of the technology. So you've got people who are looking at it from a law enforcement perspective. So how AI could be used to help law enforcement track down potential suspects, gather information, process information. One of the people speaking was the Redmond police chief, who said that, with AI, they can go through 14 hours of video in about 45 minutes and come up with information that's useful for them when pursuing an investigation.
As a child of the 90s, I grew up watching Judge Dredd, Minority Report, and all of these sci-fi movies about when this type of technology gets into the hands of law enforcement and becomes a scary, scenario. Were there fears about privacy brought up during this call? I'm not saying that they're going to be accusing you of a crime that you might commit 30 years from now, like in the movie Minority Report. But I just get a little itchy about, facial recognition in public places, entered into a database somewhere. Was that brought up?
Yeah, that's actually one of the biggest concerns. Also, when it comes to, for example, automatic license plate readers, or you have facial recognition software. And one of the things that the police chief noted during the meeting is that there is no expectation of privacy in public. So if you're out in public, you can be recorded and there's nothing you can do about it.
And that's kind of the general consensus with the ALPers too, right? The automated license plate readers is that, well, you're on a public thoroughfare. We should be able to record your license plate and enter it into a database to know, upon our beck and call where you've been or the places that you've passed through these readers with your vehicle, right?
Yeah. And so, and then also you have the private sector that's looking at recording stuff or using AI to process information. So what's interesting is for, if you're a private business and you use AI, it can help you figure out if you have serial offenders coming into your stores, stealing stuff and or taking things. And then especially for big chain stores, because if you have somebody who goes to the same store just in different locations, you know who they are. You have the information that you can provide to law enforcement that just shows that this person is a serial offender and needs to be trespassed. And I mean, in the future, it could this is just a potential, but the moment that person's recognized entering the store, it could set off alarms.
I do see that. I'm a little bit more open to a private sector use of the technology that can say, okay, this person, we didn't get their ID as they ran out with 10 Louis Vuitton bags. But at the same time, we do have their face, and through the biometric data, use, we have identified the person. We can get our losses back. That does make more sense to me. But I mean, does that, you are a guy who is like a specialist in terms of privacy, and this is one of the things that you know better than almost anyone on our staff, TJ. Does that make you nervous still?
I think that it's really going to be a question of what they do with the information, but also how that information's stored. And one of the people to speak at the meeting was a senator, state senator, who said, at the very least, people need to be notified that their faces are being recorded, or that that there is government surveillance of some type in that area. But I think the reality is there's already a lot of different types of government surveillance that's going on, even out in public, where you've got the ability to scan cell phone, you just track where people are going through their cell phones because there's GPS. So my thought is that this is one step forward in something that's already been moving forward for some time. And so it does allow for a conversation about that. But maybe I just lack the imagination of a villain from a Bond movie or something like that. I think that's the problem, is like, if you're a normal human being with good intentions, you're not going to think about that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah. And TJ, as he starts searching Zillow for homes in the woods in eastern Washington. Yes. Okay. Thank you, TJ. Oh, man. Washington firearms dealers are going to have to make some considerable investments in their security infrastructure by next summer. The state law that takes effect has been enacted in other states, and like in other states, it's resulted in some of the smaller gun shops who are not able to absorb those costs to close up shop rather than comply with it. Capitol correspondent Carlene Johnson spoke with one such owner. But first, Carlene, could you describe what this new law is going to require of these licensed gun dealers?
Yeah, House Bill 2118, which doesn't take effect until July 1 of next year, 2025, is going to basically require any store that sells guns, whether that's all they sell or it's just part of the inventory, to put steel doors or bars on the storefront. Doors, every window. They will have to lock up all of the firearms and ammunition in fireproof safes overnight. So picture a gun store, if you've been in one, having to pull out all that inventory, lock it in a backroom fireproof safe after hours. And this is the big one, Cole. The security systems that include 24-hour audio and video surveillance and retention of all of those records for 90 days at a time. But then even after that, keeping that information for up to 7 years. So 90 days at a time, that would be immediately accessible but then ultimate storage of those in those 3-month chunks for up to 7 years.
Right. Now, I mean, I've been in plenty of gun stores, and the majority of them already have a lot of those security measures of what you like, the physical barriers, right? I mean, you've been in a handful as well, just out there, just covering them. I mean, it's common for them to have those types of deterrents, like the bars over the windows, and to have these big gun safes. But the one thing that you said, the cost of videotaping and recording audio as well, I learned, which was news to me. The cost of that data storage that is high definition video, which is a lot of data to be stored either on a cloud or on a hard drive somewhere for that number of years, represents the massive cost that a lot of these associations, that a lot of these gun dealers, they've said that is infeasible for us to be able to do and maintain profitability as a small business.
Exactly. And that was the main reason I was told by the owners of Stan's Mary Mart in Wenatchee. They're the ones who've already announced, we're out of the firearms business because of this. Now, that's not all they do. They're like, for readers and listeners that are familiar with like a coastal store, right? It's kind of that sort of business model where they've got hardware and some kind of farm, not farm and feed, but, camping gear and that kind of stuff. But about 30% of their business is firearms. And one of the owners, it's a family owned business, goes back 2 generations, Brandon Wright. He told me, he said, okay, so we started talking to our IT guys, what it would take. And we found out that it would cost them about $500,000 just to get this stuff up and running.
Right.
So they sat down as a family, 3 of them right now in operation, and said, can we do this? Can we bear this? And they said, you know what? We could try and make this work. But then he told me, he said, the problem is here in Washington, being in this business, we know this isn't all that's coming.
Yeah. And that's the thing too, is that and the $500,000, I mean, it sounds eye popping, but this has been implemented in other states. And when we've covered, the Center Square's covered these laws being implemented elsewhere, it typically comes out to, even for a small business with only, that it would only need a handful of cameras with microphone capabilities.
Right.
It does still amount to around $500,000 to just get the infrastructure in place to comply with the law. But then you have to consider the cost of storing that data for years to just comply with what the very base requirements are. And we've heard elsewhere, these businesses say that, we could try it, but, or we could just close. And I have heard that, and people have told me that exact same thing before too, is that, well, we could try it, but how much worse is it going to get? Because it simply takes a change of the political winds to say that's not enough. Now we need more. And then you've got a business that says, well, we've already put down close to $1 million just to comply with this law. We're just going to have to take this loss now, and now we close as a comparison. Exactly. Have you heard of other gun shops in the state saying the same thing?
I have not seen any official announcements beyond this business in Wenatchee, but I spoke to Dave Workman, editor-in-chief at the Gun Mag and with the Second Amendment Foundation. And he said, yeah, he's hearing rumblings from all kinds of guys in the industry, especially smaller mom and pop shops. And I chatted, I live in Federal Way, and I chatted with the operators of a local store here. And they just frankly said, we don't know yet. We're still running the numbers to figure out if we can comply, if it's worth it. I mean, and Brandon Wright, the gentleman at the Wenatchee store, he said, yeah, we've got cameras right now. We've got surveillance. We do these things. But because of the very specific language in this law about the angles that they have to show customer, you have to be able to go close in on customer faces, which is another privacy issue, right? He said they would have to add 25 to 30 new cameras recording 24/7 audio and video in their store beyond what they have today.
That's a ton of hardware.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've seen, too, that in the debate over these bills, this legislation, that the accusation is that the real point of this law is not to help with identifying criminals, straw purchasers. The real point is to close these shops. It becomes like a shadow tax, for instance, to say, well, the only way that they can stay open is to then charge more for people to come in and exercise their Second Amendment rights. But as this law in July comes forward, Carlene, I'm fascinated to see what you'll do with this. Thank you. When a union bargains with an employer, the conversations between the person cutting the check and the workers doing the work are what's at stake. But if the employer is the state of Washington, the government may be cutting the check, but taxpayers are the ones footing the bill. This is the crux of a legal challenge that Washington editor Brett Davis covered this week. Brett, what was the outcome of those negotiations in the AFSCME-affiliated state government worker contract?
So a little background info. The case involves a lawsuit filed by the Citizen Action Defense Fund in December of 2022 regarding negotiations between the Washington Federation of State Employees and the governor's office for failing to provide public records in connection with behind closed doors negotiations with public sector employees unions that led to biennial agreements with $997 million, a nice chunk of change, to increase salary and benefits for state employees. Thurston County Superior Court Judge Mary Sue Wilson, in March of 2023, she said that offers and counter-offers for state employee pay raises are disclosable public records once a deal is reached with the governor and posted online, as opposed to when a budget is signed. She awarded attorney's fees and costs in addition to $6 a day in penalties for noncompliance. OFM went ahead, and the Office of Financial Management went ahead and filed an appeal at the Division II Court of Appeals. And on July 16th of this year, the appellate court overturned the Thurston County Superior Court's decision. And earlier this month, the CADF, I'll get those letters right, asked the Supreme Court to take review of the matter. So that's where we are now.
Right. So what the Supreme Court did, to restate that, the appellate court sided with the state on this. So the Supreme Court would have to overturn the appellate court decision in order to make those behind the curtain negotiations public, correct?
Right. So basically OFM, they denied CADF's request, saying that the records were exempt from disclosure under the deliberative process exemption to the Public Records Act. That's things like exchange of ideas, recommendations, and opinions before a decision gets made. That allows agencies to withhold things like drafts, notes, recommendations, interagency communications, and the like. The appeals court basically said the Superior Court erred in concluding that the requested records were not pre-decisional at the time OFM denied the public records request. I know I'm getting a bit into the weeds here.
No, but I get it, though. These are formal offers from the state to a public union, and it's taxpayer dollars. I feel like that is an official enough document that I can get where the CADF is making that argument. And I always thought that deliberative exclusion was limited to the legislative process, but I guess not in Washington. Brett, what's next for this?
Well, it's a bit of a waiting game. I talked to CADF Executive Director and Counsel Jackson Maynard, and he basically said they've received notice from the court that it's accepted a briefing on whether or not to take review of the matter. A decision will be made one way or another in about 4 months. Okay, well, we will be watching. Thank you, Brett, and a big thank you to our journalists for sharing their stories today. Stay up to date with these and more at thecentersquare.com. I'm Cole Lauterbach, and until next time, this has been Washington in Focus.